Okay, so we're going to look at where theory meets technology. You can view the live lecture from last year. Okay, this will be a shorter version of the live lecture from last year. This also has some slides in which elements from an earlier lecture just to reinforce some of the key points. Okay, and once you've watched this, you can do a quiz about it. Right, so if we think about some types of basic crime prevention theories, okay, and how we can apply this to this particular module where we're focused around the internet and various aspects of technology, okay. So social versus situational. So social crime prevention focuses on kind of broader social issues such as inequalities linked to education, housing, resources, and poverty, okay. So these kind of rooted in more kind of social science, sociological theories. Situational crime prevention focuses on the particular instances of where crimes tend to be happening, okay, and how we prevent crimes coming about. This is just one way that you can divide it up. You can take other approaches, but it's quite a useful approach, okay. And I will acknowledge both of these as we go through the slides. Situational crime prevention is often seen as a very kind of pragmatic, it's about, well, what works, what kind of stuff works, which is fine. But you also sometimes need to be able to step back and try and think about, not getting people to engage perhaps in criminal activity in the first place. So going back to the days of Tony Blair, we might think about tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. Okay, so tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Or we might think about it in terms of a more kind of epidemiological approach, where we might think about kind of having an acute hospital treatment, which might be our kind of situational crime prevention. As opposed to kind of having GPs general practice, where we try and look at the general health and stop people getting particularly ill in the first place. Anyway, let's move on to the next bit. Okay, so situational crime prevention, crime is seen as opportunistic in nature. So how do we reduce these opportunities for crime? And we have the notion of defensible space. Okay, this comes from somebody with an architectural background, Oscar Newman. And particularly we've got this idea of crime prevention through environmental design, CRIM. So certainly those of you who are criminology students, think back to your first year, crime prevention through environmental design, routine activity theory, social disorganisation. These were kind of key things that you were introduced to. Okay? And it thinks about natural surveillance, access control, reinforcing evidence of kind of territorial positions, etc. And this is a big area within criminology, and what we want to do is think about how we can translate some of this stuff from the physical world into kind of cyberspace, okay? Bearing in mind that cyberspace also is ultimately rooted in the physical world, okay? Things like data centers and stuff. So I'm just going to go through this fairly briefly because we have covered some of these bits in the lecture before, okay? And so what I want to do is just go through some of these bits and then introduce some new bits in that you should find helpful. Okay, so CRIM, the core principles, this idea of physical security, surveillance, movement control, management and maintenance, and this idea as well as defensible space. And some of these things obviously we can translate over into what we are doing in the online world. So the physical security might include things like having PIN codes or having thumbprint readers on things like laptops and mobile phones and devices like that. The surveillance, well, there's an awful lot of surveillance that takes place online, okay? It's not all for crime reduction purposes, of course, some of it's for kind of marketing and other purposes. So whilst the kind of internet and a lot of the technologies associated with it are proven problematic because they're useful vectors for criminal activities, they also, by their very nature, are fantastic in terms of collecting digital forensic trails, digital footprints, etc., etc. So if you think about it in terms of surveillance like that, very useful, okay? And then also there's kind of surveillance in the sense of when we're thinking about kind of CCTV, or we're thinking about facial recognition, and thinking about having surveillance technologies linking up to kind of back-end databases and this kind of stuff. Again, movement control and stuff, well, again, we have similar things online, so we have lots of bits where there are passwords, or there are lots of websites, and you'll discover this when you go to work in an organisation where there are certain parts of the site that you're not allowed into because it looks at your username and you have a certain set of rights and access to things. You know, at a simple level, it happens with Now. So staff can see all kinds of things on Now that students can't see, but then there are restrictions as to what staff can see stuff. Within that, so not every member of staff can go into any kind of module willy-nilly and see stuff. And also in terms of seeing that stuff is free from signs of disorder and this kind of thing, you might think, well, how does that apply to websites? Well, if you think about it in terms of how you might manage social media, social networks, and the kind of discussion forums and comments that take place there, okay, clearly some are not particularly well supervised, if supervised at all, right? And there's partly a legal reason for that, is because a lot of these big platforms position themselves, okay, almost as kind of as platforms. They don't want to be seen as being actual content providers themselves. They want to be like in the same position as the post office and things like the telephone companies and stuff, okay, so that they can't be, excuse me, held responsible for some of the stuff that's taking place there. But this is where you need to think about how you would translate things over into what you might see in the real world around a city and a kind of, you know, a litter-strewn street, etc., as opposed to, well, what's taking place online in various spaces. And again, defensible spaces and stuff like that, it might, again, some of it comes back to kind of clear control and access controls mixed with things like branding, and recommendations about, you know, what you do and how you behave on the site, and not going off sites to engage in other conversations, etc., etc. Okay, so as I've said, just because I tend to preempt some stuff, so if we think about it in cyber, hybrid and physical environments, okay, so there's a whole kind of spectrum along which we might apply SEPTED at various points. So like I said, conceived for physical environments, but we could apply it online, and we can apply it in that kind of cyber stroke, virtual stroke, well, at this end there's very physical things like people who've got phones and computers, and there are data centers, and there are fiber optic networks and all kinds of things, okay, so there is a physical manifestation of all the kind of virtual stuff, okay, so it's all rooted in very physical stuff, as we said. And then, you know, like social media platforms, social networking sites, they have this kind of function as well, where they're operating at a kind of both a kind of micro and macro level in terms of personal interactions that are kind of seen as being virtual or cyber. But ultimately, the whole thing roots back to the real, as it were, because this is by and large people who are engaging. Okay, so again, I won't go through all of these again, but it's just, you know, think about how you can apply some of these core principles to some of the things that we have encountered during the course of the module. You'll find that very useful to do. Like I said, situational crime prevention, it's seen as opportunistic in nature, so how do we reduce those opportunities for crime? Also things like with routine activity theory, okay, this is a kind of an explanatory theory of crime, so it's like, well, where can we identify the different elements in? I've also brought in this notion of using routine activity theory almost as a kind of diagnostic tool, where we might identify, and I'll cover this in a few slides, identify who's playing the key roles here. And it's fine, you can go, well, okay, well, this is the motivated offender, this is the lack of the capable guardian, here's our kind of potential vulnerable victim. So we've got those three elements together. But then in practice, okay, what would we actually do about it? And I've got a couple of slides coming up which might help you to do that. Okay, and one of the things that I keep banging on about in this particular module is that the absence of a capable guardian, whereas traditionally it might have been seen as like, you know, like a police officer or a parent or a supervisor or somebody, you know, like a person or a set of people. One of the things I've said in terms of cybercrime, online crime, is it might be the lack of a system, okay? So there may be things built into a system which are supposed to act as a capable guardian. The other lack of a capable guardian is a structural thing, again, something that I've mentioned, because we think in terms of disintermediation. So we think in terms of scalability, making it really easy to kind of interact with people, really easy to exchange data, etc., etc. Okay, so the system architecturally is designed to facilitate all that and to not put blocks and checks in place unnecessarily, in order for it to run really efficiently and really optimize for speed and scalability and shareability. So you've got those architectural things, as well as system things that may be on particular platforms, okay, such as the automated scanning of emails, or the automated scanning of text, or the scanning of the content of images and stuff that may be uploaded to things like social media platforms. Again, target hardening, so it's like this real world embodiment, so we think in terms of property and houses, about alarms and fences and grills and overlocks and security measures, but how might we translate those into online accounts? So if we're trying to protect, for example, bank accounts from being hacked, then as well as having passwords and stuff, we may have additional kind of factors of authentication. It says reach into the drawer because somewhere nearby to here, I may have dumped it actually. Oh no, hang on. I'll come back in a second. Right, I'm back. So it might be, for example, that you're also issued with things like additional little PIN codes and stuff. This is from an old bank account, so don't get too excited. And it's become redundant as well, old bank account redundant. But what it meant was I could use this with a card and a menu, and had to follow instructions and do various things, and it generated codes and stuff, which I then had to put into the online banking system. Okay, so that would be one example of it. And again, like special number identity question, the card read was said there, or maybe I'll get sent a code to my mobile device, and I have to enter the code from my mobile device within a certain time into the online systems, etc., etc. So there are lots of different ways that it can be done, but it's been done. That's the important thing. Okay, routine activity theory, right? I've talked about this very briefly because we've talked about it a lot during the module, and I do talk about it a lot because I think it's very easy to get conceptually, and it's very easy to apply, especially for those students who've come in from psychology or from the law school, who haven't encountered it in detail in kind of years 1 and 2 of their degrees. So that key thing about our motivated offender, our likely target, and the absence of a capable guardian. Okay, there are more complicated manifestations of this that you can look at if you want to go look at the theory in more detail, but for what we want, it's fine to kind of operate at this level. Okay, and so where we've got those three things to come together, then this says this is where crime might take place. Okay, so for example, if we look at sextortion, who would play the different roles? So we've got a sextortionist, motivated offender, we have our victim, and we have our capable guardian, an absent capable guardian. So here the absent capable guardian might be parents, might be peers, might be police, might be other authorities. Or again, it may be something in the system that's not checking for the types of images that are being uploaded, etc., etc. Okay. In terms of fraud, we've got our online fraudster, our online victim, again the absent capable guardian. So the online fraudster benefits from anonymity, or certainly deceptive personality. Okay, it may not be. They may be anonymous, or they may be constructed or stolen an identity or something. They've got international reach. They've got low-cost communications thanks to the technology. Our online victim can be out there anywhere in the world. Fantastic. In terms of this, if I'm an online fraudster, I want to be able to reach out to all these people. And the absent capable guardian may be the lack of authorities, or certainly effective authorities. It may be the lack of trained police officers, lack of legislation, these kind of things. Okay. So again, just going through it fairly quickly because this is stuff that we have covered before, but I'm just kind of reminding you of it. Again, in terms of routine activity as a diagnostic tool, then having identified the three elements about who's the offender, who's the target, who's the capable guardian, you could then bring in one of the other kind of theories and think about, okay, well, what do we actually do about it to harden the target? What do we actually do about it? Okay, to mitigate, to neutralise the absence of a capable guardian. Okay, so you could look at some of the other theories, such as and think about target hardening stuff, about what kind of things you would do to do that. And again, we've hinted at it with various things here. Okay. Revenge porn is another example. So again, who plays the roles here? I've done loads of these in some of the previous lectures where I've gone through loads and loads of different topics about who's playing the role. I'm not going to go through them all again now, but again, just to remind you of it. So the key thing is, for whatever topic you're choosing, if you want to bring this in, then who plays the different roles, okay? So who's playing the different roles? So that we've got our victim of revenge porn, our motivated offender, our capable guardian, lack of, okay? So again, it might be that we've got an ex-partner, or we've got a hacker, for example, okay, and certainly so-called revenge porn, right, and that's a contentious phrase anyway, because it suggests that these people have done something wrong in the first place and they've been revenged and avenged, okay. Not the case. These are innocent victims by and large, okay. So it could be then we've got our ex-partner, and the lack of a capable guardian is the fact that, you know, having obtained these images, perhaps consensually in a prior relationship, okay, I can then upload them to all kinds of places, and there's no particular kind of checks on me uploading the stuff. So the images are out there. I might put additional information up there. I might choose to dox somebody as well as share their images and put information out there and encourage people to contact them, right, and kind of pile in and put further grief on them, etc., etc. The lack of the capable guardian might also be the lack of specific laws, okay. So again, one of the things that we know from looking at upskirting or from so-called revenge porn is that, oh my god, this is a dreadful practice, surely it's against the law. No, and this is a good example of where technology and social practices, including criminological practices, have kind of moved ahead of the law, or they did for a while, and now we've looked at how lots of different countries and different states within the United States, for example, have introduced specific acts to make these specific offences, okay? But we know that there are issues with that, as we've discussed in detail elsewhere. And again, in terms of other protections, you know, could you bring in, for example, artificial intelligence and various things like that to spot where images of naked people were being uploaded, or people engaged in sexual activity, and maybe it could flag it up or pause it before it was made put onto public profiles on things like social media. You know, people are looking at this kind of thing, but it's not necessarily that easy to do, despite some of the claims for artificial intelligence. And crucially, you know, some sites actually their business model is anyone up, etc., etc., now closed down. But these types of sites, same with Pornhub and stuff like that, okay, is that materials going up there, and it could be seen as a kind of a management or a protocol thing, that they're not really that bothered about it, because actually it's good for their business, and they're very slow to take stuff down, and sometimes stuff is taken down but then it's reloaded pretty quickly by the offenders, okay. Again, that's stuff that we've looked at in detail in other things. So who's playing the different roles? So RAT for any topic, Mutant Activity. So for whatever your chosen topic, who's playing the role of the likely offender, suitable target or victim, and where's the lack of the capable guardian, the authority figure, okay. So we've done loads of examples, not too difficult to figure out. In terms of some other theories that you might want to bring in, and again, when I saw people's formative assessments, it was good that people had brought stuff in from psychology, and people had brought stuff in from sort of general sociology. We can think about things like deterrence theory, going back to kind of Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham, and this idea that we can deter people from committing criminal acts. So if something is made illegal and there's a punishment, and we know there's a punishment for doing certain things, then that might deter me from doing it, okay? It does assume that I'm behaving rationally, so it's a subset of rational choice theory, and this is one of the problems with deterrence theory, is that it's kind of good, you're kind of making, it's almost like you're making an economic judgment. Oh, you know, is there a net benefit to me doing this? What's the chance of me getting away with it? What will I gain from doing it, as opposed to the punishment? Let's go and look the punishment up. But in practice, a lot of people have very little idea of what the actual punishments are for committing particular crimes. And it's also partly because it depends on if you've committed other crimes before. There's often a range, like a sentencing range and stuff like that. But crucially, many people are not acting rationally at the time. They may simply be very emotional, anger being one emotion, okay? People may be not thinking straight because they've imbibed alcohol or other drugs. And there's been some interesting test cases looking at where people, for example, have got various types of brain malfunctions and stuff, okay? where the defence might say, well, this person can't think rationally, they were acting irrationally, but it's because they've got these clinical conditions, etc. In terms of things like the online disinhibition effect, something we flagged up before, again, people acting differently where they're kind of mediating what's going on between themselves and what's going on to a camera or what's going on to a screen, okay, and how it kind of perhaps is lowering the barriers to entry to various types of poor behaviour that we might see on there. We could combine that with things like, again, social learning theory, okay, where it might be that we learn some of our behaviours and we learn some of our attitudes by what we observe taking place in the world, okay, and so it could be you're not quite sure what's acceptable, for example, in terms of cyberbullying and posting really horrible comments about people, but if you're in forums where you're seeing lots of postings that are kind of racist and misogynistic, etc., you may decide, well, actually that's the norm, that's what I'm going to do, okay. And you may get additional assurance thanks to things like the anonymity that's apparently offered by the technology, and the general disinhibiting effects of being distanced from your victim by the technology. So you can actually think about how John Schuler's work comes into play, along with things like the work of Bandura, social learning theory, etc. There's also, a case to be with things like general strain theory as well. Again, you can go and look it up if you're not familiar with it, but for many criminologists, you're not aware of these kind of strains within society, these stresses within society, that can cause people to react in a certain way that then makes them engage in criminal or certainly antisocial behaviour themselves. Okay, so it may be that they're the victims of deep, apparently unfair poverty. It may be that they've been marginalised somehow, they're seen as geeks. This is certainly one of the explanations that's offered up for people engaged in hacking. So where they don't fit in at school, for example, and they're generally stressed, etc., they're not part of the jock culture, they can find an outlet for themselves in other cultures, such as hacking online and things like that. It may be that you're the victim of racism, or you're the victim of various other things like that, which can then lead you to react in certain ways. So again, I'm not going to go into it in detail here. You can go and have a look at it if you want to. What I'm trying to say is don't exclude bringing these things in. So if you've encountered these in other modules, right, and you want to bring them in, or you've encountered them through your work on your dissertation, right, then feel free to bring this stuff in, right. But what's important is that whatever theory you bring into the assignment, make sure you do so explicitly, okay. So we need to make something there. Sometimes people talk around stuff, and what they don't do is give a single supporting reference or explicitly say what they're referring to, right. So you need to do that. That's really important. You can bring in a range of theories, as I was saying, criminology primarily, right, but also stuff from economics, psychology, sociology. If you want to bring something in, brilliant, not a problem at all. It's really, really helpful, right, in terms of your mark, to have something in there that's explicit, that's relevant and explicit. Yeah. So we need some evidence that you're linking theoretical explanations to what we're seeing going on in real world practices. If you want to bring in a couple of theories, or 2 or 3 things, fine. If you think that they kind of complement one another and can offer an explanation, not a problem. If you want to bring something in and then offer a critique of it and mention there's another theory that might explain it, fine, okay? You haven't got loads of space within this particular assignment, like many assignments, go into it in loads and loads of detail, but bring something in, make it relevant, explain how the theory that you bring in, okay, how does it link to what you're talking about here, okay? And then just go back and look at some of the slides and listen to what I've said, and it doesn't take an awful lot in terms of word count to explain this is a theory and this is how it helps to explain what we're seeing in this particular situation. Okay, fantastic. As always, you can post upon the FAQs, you can email me, and we'll also be putting up some other means of communication in the near future. Okay, thank you very much. Bye for now.